It was the muffled thuds that woke me from my restless slumber. Disoriented, I blinked at the blinking red numbers on my nightstand. 2:17 a.m. The noise persisted, followed by what sounded like hurried footsteps. Adrenaline surged through my body as I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops. Before I could dial, a frantic knocking erupted from my front door. "Arya, are you all right? Open up." It was Mr. Halgren, my elderly neighbor from across the hall. Clutching my robe tightly, I rushed to the door and peered through the peephole. His face was etched with concern. "What's going on?" I asked, unlocking the door. "I heard strange noises from your brother's place next door," he said, his voice quivering. "It sounded like someone was breaking in." My stomach knotted at the mention of my estranged brother, Elric. We hadn't spoken in years, not since the ugly inheritance dispute after our parents' tragic deaths. But the mere thought of him rekindled the bitterness that still simmered inside me. Pushing those feelings aside, I followed Mr. Halgren down the dimly lit hallway. As we approached Elric's apartment, an eerie silence filled the air. I peered through the crack of his partially open door and gasped. The place was ransacked, furniture overturned, drawers emptied, and belongings strewn across the floor. My heart raced as I instinctively clutched Mr. Halgren's arm. "We should call the police," he urged. But before I could respond, a sickening realization hit me. If Elric's place was broken into, what about mine? Rushing back, I flung open my apartment door and froze. The scene that greeted me was like a punch to the gut. My sanctuary, the space I had so carefully curated, was in complete disarray. "Oh, dear Lord," Mr. Halgren muttered behind me. I stumbled inside, surveying the chaos. Picture frames shattered, books scattered, cushions ripped open. It was as if a tornado had ripped through. But one thing immediately caught my eye: the glowing screen of my laptop, still intact amidst the wreckage. With trembling hands, I lifted the device and felt my world shift. Dozens of emails, all sent from my account, detailed confidential information about my employer's cybersecurity protocols. It was a damning trail of corporate espionage, and it was undeniably linked to me. My legs buckled, and I sank to the floor, clutching the laptop to my chest. Someone had framed me, and deep down, I knew exactly who it was. The question was why? And how far would Elric go to destroy me? As the initial shock wore off, my mind raced to make sense of the incriminating evidence staring back at me. Corporate espionage was a federal offense, one that could land me in prison for years. But why would Elric go to such lengths to frame me? The answer hit me like a ton of bricks. The inheritance money from our parents. After their untimely deaths in a car accident 5 years ago, the bulk of their considerable estate had been left to me. Elric had always resented that decision, claiming our parents favored me, but the truth was, his reckless spending and mounting debts made him an untrustworthy custodian of the family's wealth. With a few clicks, I accessed the email trail, my hands shaking as I scanned the damning messages. Each one contained sensitive data that could cripple my employer's network security, product roadmaps, customer lists, even source code for their flagship software. And they were all linked back to my corporate account. "This can't be happening," I muttered, bile rising in my throat. "What is it, dear?" Mr. Halgren asked, his voice laced with concern. I turned the laptop toward him, revealing the incriminating messages. "Someone's trying to frame me for stealing company secrets." His eyes widened as he read through the emails. But who would do such a thing? The answer was painfully obvious, but I couldn't bring myself to voice the name. Instead, I pulled up the account logs, tracing the origin of the messages. To my dismay, the timestamps aligned with the time frame Mr. Halgren had mentioned, when he heard noises coming from Elric's apartment. "Arya?" Mr. Halgren prodded gently. I swallowed hard, the bitter truth leaving an acrid taste in my mouth. It was Elric. He broke into my place and sent these emails to make it look like I'm selling company secrets. The elderly man's brow furrowed in disbelief. "But why would your own brother do such a terrible thing?" A mirthless laugh escaped my lips. "Money, greed, jealousy, take your pick." I shook my head, disgusted. "He's always resented that our parents left the inheritance to me instead of him." Memories of our last explosive argument flooded back, Elric's words cutting like knives. "You don't deserve a penny of what's rightfully mine. I'll make you pay for this, Arya. Mark my words." At the time, I'd brushed off his threats as empty tantrums. But now, as I stared at the damning evidence, the true depths of his depravity became chillingly clear. We need to call the authorities, Mr. Halgren urged, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. I wanted nothing more than to have Elric arrested, to see him pay for his betrayal. But something held me back, a nagging voice in my head that whispered of another way, a path that would ensure his downfall was complete and utterly merciless. Clenching my jaw, I made a decision that would set in motion a vicious game of revenge, one that would force Elric to reap the consequences of his actions in the most devastating way possible. Not yet, I said, my voice steely with resolve. I have a better idea. Over the next few days, I threw myself into an investigation to uncover the full scope of Elric's treachery. Using my cybersecurity skills, I traced the origin of the incriminating emails back to his apartment's Wi-Fi network. But that was just the beginning. Digging deeper, I discovered security footage from the building's parking garage that confirmed my worst suspicions. The grainy video showed Elric slipping into my apartment complex around 10 p.m., just a few hours before Mr. Halgren had heard the disturbance next door. My blood boiled as I watched my brother's familiar figure furtively making his way inside, no doubt to plant the evidence that would frame me for corporate espionage. The sheer, calculated nature of his betrayal left me reeling. I knew I needed to confront him, to look him in the eye and demand an explanation for his despicable actions. But part of me feared what I might find lurking beneath the surface, the true depths of his depravity. Still, I steeled my resolve and arranged to meet him at a nearby cafe, neutral territory where he wouldn't feel cornered. As I waited at a secluded table, my fingers drummed an anxious rhythm on the tabletop. The bell above the door jingled, and Elric sauntered in, his expression a mask of casual indifference, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted around the room before finally settling on me. "Arya?" He greeted flatly, sliding into the chair across from me. "It's been a while." "Cut the crap, Elric," I snapped, shoving my laptop across the table. The incriminating emails were displayed in all their damning glory. "You broke into my place and tried to frame me for selling company secrets. Why?" For a moment, his facade cracked, and I glimpsed the churning mixture of rage and desperation that simmered beneath. But then, just as quickly, he regained his composure, his lips curling into a sneer. "You think you're so smart, don't you?" he spat, leaning forward menacingly. "Always the perfect one, Mommy and Daddy's golden child. Well, let me tell you something. That inheritance should have been mine." I recoiled at the venom in his voice, but he wasn't done. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" he hissed. "Drowning in debt, struggling to make ends meet while you're living the high life off our parents' money. You didn't deserve a penny of what they left you." His words hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and I found myself struggling to breathe. This wasn't just about greed or jealousy. It was a twisted, all-consuming hatred that had festered for years. "So you decided to try and send me to prison?" I countered, incredulous. "You're sick, Elric, truly sick." He let out a harsh laugh, devoid of any mirth. "Prison would have been too good for you. No, I wanted to see you utterly ruined, stripped of everything you hold dear. That inheritance was supposed to be my salvation, my way out of this hellhole I've been living in. And you stole that from me." In that moment, I saw the true depths of his malice, and a part of me shriveled inside. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stripping him of the power he so desperately craved, dismantling his delusions of entitlement until he had nothing left. As I stared into the abyss of his blackened soul, I knew there was no turning back. The game was on, and I would stop at nothing to ensure Elric's downfall was absolute. In the days following my confrontation with Elric, a cold determination settled over me. His twisted sense of entitlement and utter disregard for the consequences of his actions had solidified my resolve. He needed to be stopped, and I was the only one who could do it. But I couldn't just turn him in, not after the lengths he'd gone to frame me. No, I needed a more surgical strike, a plan that would dismantle his delusions of grandeur and leave him with nowhere to run. Digging deeper into his activities, I uncovered a trail of shady dealings and black market transactions, a desperate attempt to fund his lavish lifestyle through illegal means. Suddenly, his obsession with the inheritance money made sickening sense. It wasn't just about greed. It was about fueling his criminal enterprises. With each new discovery, the pieces fell into place, revealing the true extent of his depravity. He was a cancer, slowly spreading his poison through our family's legacy, and I was the only one with the skills to excise that malignant growth once and for all. I began meticulously documenting every shred of evidence, building an airtight case against him. Bank statements, encrypted communications, even grainy surveillance footage, nothing was left uncovered. It was all part of a larger strategy, a chess game where I held the advantage of foresight and preparation. As the weeks ticked by, I could sense Elric's growing unease, the way his eyes would dart around whenever we crossed paths, as if he knew the walls were closing in. But still, he maintained his facade of arrogance, convinced that his misdeeds were safely hidden from view. Little did he know that I was merely biding my time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. That chance came in the form of a family gathering, one of those obligatory affairs where distant relatives would congregate and exchange forced pleasantries. Elric, ever the opportunist, saw it as a chance to flaunt his ill-gotten wealth, parading around like a peacock in his designer suit and flashy watch. But I had other plans. Carefully, I began weaving a web of subtle revelations, dropping breadcrumbs of information about Elric's shady dealings in hushed conversations with our more influential relatives. A whispered comment here, a pointed glance there, each carefully calculated to plant the seeds of suspicion. And of course, I made sure Elric was always within earshot, close enough to catch the murmurs of an impending investigation, the hints of his empire crumbling around him. I could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed veneer, the beads of sweat forming on his brow as paranoia took root. With each passing hour, his forced laughter became more strained, his movements more erratic. By the time the evening drew to a close, Elric was a shell of his former self, his once cocky swagger replaced by a haunted look of desperation. As he made his way out, our eyes locked for a brief moment, and I knew he could see the triumph glinting in my gaze. The game was nearing its climax, and I held all the cards. All that was left was to sit back and watch as Elric's world unraveled, the consequences of his actions finally catching up to him in the most poetic of ways. The weeks following the family gathering were a masterclass in psychological warfare. With each passing day, I could see the toll my carefully orchestrated revelations were taking on Elric. The once cocky swagger had given way to a perpetual state of unease, his eyes darting around like a cornered animal searching for an escape route. And I was more than happy to oblige, strategically leaking just enough information to keep the pressure mounting. A whispered conversation here, a pointed look there, each one designed to reinforce the growing paranoia that his world was crumbling around him. It was a delicate dance, one that required equal parts patience and precision. Too much, too soon, and he might bolt, scattering his misdeeds to the wind. But too little, and the fear might dissipate, allowing him to regain his footing. So I bided my time, methodically tightening the noose until the slightest movement would spell his undoing. The breaking point came one evening as I was leaving the office. My phone buzzed with a frantic call from Elric, his voice a strangled whisper on the other end. "Arya, please, you have to help me." I could barely contain my smirk as I replied, feigning ignorance. "Help you with what, exactly?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear the gears turning in his desperate mind, weighing the pros and cons of confiding in me. It's about the stuff I've been involved with," he finally admitted, his words laced with thinly veiled panic. "The illegal dealings, the black market trades, everything. Someone's on to me, Arya. I don't know how, but they know." A twisted sense of satisfaction unfurled in my chest at the sound of his franticness. This was it, the moment I'd been meticulously orchestrating for weeks. The trap was sprung, and Elric was caught squarely in its jaws. "Well, well, well," I murmured, savoring the moment. "It seems the tables have turned, dear brother." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end, and I could envision his eyes widening in horrified realization. "You," he stammered, the word thick with accusation. "You did this. You set me up." A low, humorless chuckle escaped my lips. "I didn't set you up, Elric. I merely provided the rope for you to hang yourself with. A rope expertly woven from your own misdeeds and insatiable greed." There was a beat of silence, and then his voice returned, low and pleading. "Arya, please, you have to help me. I'm your brother, flesh and blood. Whatever I've done, I'll make it right, I swear. Just don't let them take me. His desperate pleas should have stirred something within me, some lingering shred of familial loyalty. But as I stood there, bathed in the flickering glow of street lamps, all I felt was a cold, steely resolve. You brought this on yourself, Elric, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth or compassion. And now you'll face the consequences of your actions alone. With that, I ended the call, leaving him to stew in the bitter juices of his own making. The endgame was in motion, and there was no turning back. In the days that followed, the authorities closed in like a vice, meticulously dismantling Elric's criminal empire piece by piece. And through it all, I watched from the sidelines, a silent spectator to his downfall, reveling in the sweet taste of justice being served. The sound of the doorbell pierced the tranquil silence of my apartment, jolting me from my reverie. With a resigned sigh, I already knew who it was. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Elric stood on the other side, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled and haggard. His eyes were sunken, rimmed with dark circles, and his expensive suit hung loosely from his frame. You have to help me, Arya, he rasped, his voice a mere shadow of its former arrogant timbre. They're closing in, and I don't know what to do. I regarded him coolly, unmoved by his desperate plea. And why, pray tell, should I lift a finger to help you? Elric's face contorted into a mask of anguish, his pride finally crumbling under the weight of his dire circumstances. Because I'm your brother, damn it! We're family! A bitter laugh escaped my lips. Family? You forfeited any claim to that when you tried to frame me and steal what little I had left of our parents' legacy. His shoulders slumped, and for a moment I almost felt a twinge of pity. Almost. I was desperate, Arya, he pleaded, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. You have to understand, I was drowning in debt, and the inheritance was my only way out. I never meant for things to go this far. I arched an eyebrow, unconvinced. And the corporate espionage? The black market dealings? Were those acts of desperation too? Elric flinched, his gaze dropping to the floor in shame. I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I'm paying for them, Arya. Isn't that enough? Shaking my head, I fixed him with a steely glare. No, Elric. It's not enough. Not even close. His head snapped up, eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fear. What are you saying? I'm saying that you brought this upon yourself, I stated, my voice hardening. You made your bed, and now you have to lie in it. The authorities are closing in, and there's nothing I can do to stop it. Elric's face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might actually break down and cry. But then, like a switch being flipped, his expression hardened, and a familiar glint of defiance flashed in his eyes. You're enjoying this, aren't you? He spat, his tone laced with venom. Watching me squirm, seeing me brought low. Well, let me tell you something, sister dearest. I'm not going down without a fight. I met his gaze unflinchingly, unimpressed by his bravado. It's over, Elric. Your little criminal empire is crumbling, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. He opened his mouth, no doubt to hurl another venomous retort. But the sound of approaching sirens cut him off. His head whipped around, eyes widening in panic as the wail of the sirens grew louder. This isn't over, he hissed, backing away from my door. You haven't seen the last of me, Arya. But even as the words left his lips, I could see the fear flickering in his eyes. He knew it was a hollow threat, a desperate attempt to cling to whatever shred of power he had left. As the police cars screeched to a halt outside my building, Elric turned and bolted, disappearing into the night like a cornered rat fleeing from the light. And in that moment, I felt a sense of profound satisfaction wash over me. The game was finally over, and I had won. Elric's downfall was complete, and he had no one to blame but himself. The weeks following Elric's desperate visit were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, the authorities had wasted no time in dismantling his criminal enterprise, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice. I found myself being called in for questioning, forced to recount every sordid detail of my brother's misdeeds. It was a cathartic experience, purging the festering wound of his betrayal with each damning revelation. Through it all, Elric remained defiant, lashing out at anyone and everyone within his reach. His once charming facade had been stripped away, revealing the true depths of his malice and depravity. The trial itself was a media circus. with reporters and camera crews swarming the courthouse like vultures circling a carcass. Elric, of course, played it up for the cameras, alternating between proclamations of innocence and vitriolic tirades against me. But in the end, the evidence was too overwhelming, the trail of breadcrumbs I had carefully laid too intricate to unravel. One by one, the charges were read: corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and a litany of other offenses that would make even the most hardened criminal blanch. And through it all, Elric maintained his arrogant sneer, as if daring the world to try and break him. That is, until the verdict was announced. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as the judge cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the gathered spectators before finally settling on my brother. On the charges of corporate espionage, fraud, racketeering, and numerous counts of illegal black market dealings, this court finds the defendant, Elric Lane, guilty on all counts. The words hung in the air like a suffocating fog, and for a moment I thought Elric might actually collapse. His face drained of color, his mouth working soundlessly as the full weight of the verdict crashed down upon him. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the moment passed. His features hardened, and he fixed me with a look of pure unadulterated hatred. "You did this?" he hissed, straining against the bailiffs who were already moving to escort him from the courtroom. "You're the one who destroyed everything, Arya. You'll pay for this, I swear to God." His venomous words were met with stoic silence from the gallery, and I merely held his gaze, unflinching. In that moment, I felt no satisfaction, no sense of triumph or vindication. Just a profound sense of relief that the nightmare was finally over. The weeks and months that followed were a blur of sentencing hearings and legal proceedings, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of Elric's once promising future. He was slapped with a hefty prison sentence, as well as crippling fines and restitutions that would ensure he would never again taste the lavish lifestyle he had so coveted. And through it all, I remained a silent observer, watching as the brother I had once loved was slowly stripped of everything: his wealth, his freedom, his very identity. It was a bitter victory, to be sure, but a necessary one. Elric's greed and envy had poisoned our family's legacy, and the only way to excise that malignant growth was to cut it out, root and stem. As I sat in the courtroom gallery, watching him be led away in shackles, I felt a strange sense of finality wash over me. The chapter of my life that had been defined by his malevolence was finally closed, and I was free to move on, to forge a new path, unburdened by the weight of his betrayal. It was a bittersweet feeling, tempered by the lingering sorrow of what might have been, had he chosen a different path. But in the end, Elric had made his bed, and now he would have to lie in it, alone, with nothing but the bitter taste of karma to keep him company. Months ticked by, the weight of Elric's downfall gradually lifting from my shoulders with each passing day. It was a strange feeling, this newfound lightness, as if a dark cloud had finally parted, allowing the warmth of the sun to wash over me once again. I found myself rediscovering simple pleasures I had long taken for granted: the freedom to come and go as I pleased without the specter of his malice looming overhead, the ability to surround myself with people who genuinely cared for me, not just what I could provide them. It was a rebirth of sorts, a chance to shed the baggage of my past and forge a new path forward, one untainted by the bitter aftertaste of betrayal. Of course, there were still moments when the memories would come creeping back, uninvited guests at the party of my newfound contentment. But those fleeting pangs of anger or sorrow were quickly tempered by the knowledge that I had emerged victorious, that Elric's twisted machinations had ultimately been his undoing. In many ways, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to weather even the most devastating of storms and come out stronger on the other side. It was a lesson I carried with me as I embarked on the next chapter of my life, leaving the city that had been the backdrop for so much turmoil and striking out in search of greener pastures. My newfound independence manifested itself in the form of a burgeoning cybersecurity consulting firm, a venture that allowed me to channel my skills and expertise into something truly meaningful. And with each successful project, each satisfied client, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that had long been denied me. But perhaps the greatest source of fulfillment came in the form of mentoring young women just starting out in the field, imparting not just technical knowledge, but also the hard-won lessons of perseverance and self-belief that had carried me through my darkest hours. It was a full-circle moment, a chance to pay forward the kindness and support that had once been so desperately lacking in my own life. And so as the sun began to dip below the horizon on another eventful day, I found myself reflecting on the winding path that had brought me to this point, the triumphs, the heartaches, and everything in between. The sound of the doorbell pulled me from my reverie, and I rose to answer it, a faint smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Mr. Halgren?" I greeted warmly, ushering the elderly man inside. "Right on time, as always," he chuckled, his eyes twinkling with mirth. "You know me, Arya. Punctuality is my middle name." As I led him to the dining room, already set for our weekly dinner ritual, I couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude for his unwavering presence throughout the ordeal with Elric. He had been my rock, my anchor in the storm, and for that I would be forever grateful. "So," he said, settling into his chair with a contented sigh, "how's the new business venture coming along?" I felt a genuine smile spread across my face as I launched into an enthusiastic update, the weight of my past finally lifting as I looked ahead to the boundless possibilities that awaited. It was a new beginning, a fresh start untainted by the shadows of my brother's malice. And as I sat there, basking in the warmth of Mr. Halgren's company, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I would face them head-on, unbowed and unbroken. For the first time in a long time, I was truly free.